Japan is one of those countries that surprises on all four aspects. And among all the things that could surprise us, one of the most striking is precisely politics. VisualPolitik fans, since the fall of the Empire of Japan in 1945, Japan has had approximately 35 prime ministers. That's roughly one prime minister every 2 years. And no, it is not that the term of office is shorter, the ordinary term of office is 4 years. What happens is that Japan changes prime minister almost as often as Manchester United has changed its coach over the last decade. Or Chelsea for that matter, they are no slouches either. However, another fundamental characteristic of Japanese politics lies precisely in its stability. To give you an idea, since the advent of democracy in Japan in the late 1950s, technically only one political party, the Liberal Democratic Party, or organizations within its orbit, has governed. In all this time, we can only find a brief 2-year hiatus in which an opposition government came to power. And no, Japan is obviously not a dictatorship. In practice, it's something like a democracy that functions on the basis of the more or less democratic bodies of its main political party. Don't tell me it's not a curious system. The fact is that in the land of the rising sun, political squabbles are fought mainly in the corridors and in the offices, so that Japanese politics has become a puzzle of comings and goings, resignations, early elections, and motions of censure. In fact, the protagonist of this video, the current Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, came to power in October 2021, and did so due to the resignation of his predecessor, Yoshihide Suga, who had only been in office for 1 year. And who knows, maybe by the time you're watching this video, good old Kishida will be history. Precisely for that reason, in order to be updated, and if you like what we do, there's nothing better than signing up to the VisualPolitik community on Patreon. You will receive newsletters, exclusive content, exclusive merchandising, and many more things that we are preparing. Thank you very much to all of you who support us month after month. And also, of course, to all of you who are on the other side of the screen, video after video. But let's not get sidetracked. The fact is that the new leader of the land of the rising sun is a character quite different from what we have seen in Japan during the last decade. And in a way, very different from the new president of South Korea, which we have already covered here on VisualPolitik. And it is so in terms of both form and substance. You see, unlike the new Korean president Yoon Suk-yeol, who is a political outsider, Kishida is an old acquaintance. In this case, we are talking about an experienced politician who has been a member of the House of Representatives since 1993, and over the years has served as Minister of State for Okinawa and Northern Territories Affairs, Minister of Defense, and Minister of Foreign Affairs under Shinzo Abe. Nevertheless, what is expected from Kishida is a major turnaround from Abe's policies within Japan, and a certain continuity in the case of foreign policy. That is, a lot more defense spending, because Japan is reportedly back on the chessboard of the world's major powers. VisualPolitik viewers, at the local level, Kishida has proposed, among many other things, to freeze the economic transformation plan known as Abenomics in order to reinvent nothing less than capitalism itself. The new Prime Minister wants to create a kind of Japanese-style market economy. Do you want to know more about what all this means, and also what plans this new leader has on such important issues as relations with China or the United States? Well, let's begin with foreign policy. So, let's get started.
The awakening of a sleeping giant.
During his administration, one of the obsessions of Shinzo Abe, Japan's longest-serving prime minister, was to bring Japan back to the international stage. To achieve this, among other measures, the Japanese government began to take increasingly tougher positions toward China and North Korea, set itself up as the protector of allies such as Taiwan, and also led to the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement, now the most fashionable trade club in the world, following the departure of the United States led by Donald Trump. In other words, we have begun to see an unusually active Japan in international politics. And not only that, Shinzo Abe also, very importantly, advocated increasing the country's military strength. This is something that we have already told you about on various occasions. Under Abe's impetus, the Japanese government has sought to change the constitution to put an end to its Article 9, which states that Japan is a fundamentally pacifist country, something that has limited the scope and funding of its self-defense forces.
Aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order, the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. Land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized. Act 9 of the Constitution of Japan.
Well, now, Fumio Kishida not only wants to go ahead with this constitutional reform, but he wants to go much further and approve an ambitious plan to improve the country's military capabilities. In fact, this is exactly what the same groups of his party that propelled him to the leadership are asking for.
Japan's ruling LDP asked government to double defense budget.
We're talking about Japan gradually approaching and even exceeding 2% of GDP in military spending. To give you an idea, this would bring the country's military budget to around $100 billion. This would entail an additional boost of between $50 billion and $60 billion each year. Between $240 and $300 billion in new spending over a 5-year period. Can you imagine what they could buy with that kind of money? Well, this would obviously turn Japan into a superpower and make it the country with the 3rd highest military budget in the world. This is the ultimate dream of the United States, another friendly superpower in Indochina, ready to rival the Asian giant. The fact is that the war in Ukraine has now marked a turning point. The Kishida government has stepped on the accelerator to try to use the current situation as a kind of turbo boost for its politician. And yes, Abe is also involved.
Japan's LDP features ex-PM Abe in constitutional reform drive, risking opposition backlash.
And the question is, what the hell does the war in Ukraine have to do with it? Well, we've already told you, the Russian invasion has marked a turning point. Nobody trusts the tyrants they have as neighbors anymore. And in fact, don't forget that Japan has been in its own territorial dispute with Russia since World War II over the Kuril Islands.
Japan slams Russia's move to end disputed Kuril Island peace talks over sanctions. Japan says disputed islands illegally occupied by Russia. Japan describes 4 islands whose ownership it disputes with Moscow as illegally occupied by Russia in the latest version of a diplomatic report.
So you see, Japan is gradually acquiring an increasingly important and forceful role in Asia-Pacific politics. Of course, this is not the only aspect in which the new Japanese leader is expected to follow in the footsteps of his predecessors. Kishida is also a strong advocate for repositioning Japan as the leading regional player in trade matters. We've already told you about his leadership on the CPTPP, and above all, he favors even closer ties with the United States of America. Nevertheless, the main challenge, or the main objective, depending on how you look at it, is much closer. And no, for once, we are not talking about China, but South Korea. While traditionally, relations between the two countries have been very bad, during the time that Shinzo Abe and Moon Jae-in coincided, things were even worse. Provocations on one side and intransigence on the other, and vice versa, made the fight seem endless. Hold on though, because now all that could be about to change. Cast an eye on these news headlines.
South Korea officially decides to join CPTPP to strengthen supply chain. Yoon said will positively review joining Quad if invited. Report.
And take note, because although this may seem minor, it could be the beginning of a titanic change in the region. As mentioned before, Japan leads the CPTPP trade agreement and is also a member of the Quad, a kind of military alliance or partnership between the United States, Australia, India, and Japan. Well, now you can imagine what it would mean if once and for all, South Korea and Japan were to put their old quarrels behind them and strengthen their relationship once and for all. We are talking about 2 economic and military giants. We are talking about 2 of the richest and most technological advanced countries in the world, with a combined GDP of almost $7 trillion and a joint military budget that, if the aspirations of the current Tokyo government are fulfilled, could reach between $110 and $150 billion a year. And you can believe me when I tell you that few things would be more appealing in Washington. Because if we take into account the characteristics of the armies, their commitments, and their size in terms of troops, we are talking about a budget that could be more than enough to rival the People's Republic of China itself. Let's see. Xi Jinping's country would still spend much more, some $300 billion, but its armed forces also have many more salaries to pay to maintain a deployment across all the country's borders. To put this in perspective, it is estimated that since 2008, the rising cost of personnel has eaten up more than half of the increases in China's military budget. So in terms of real investment capacity, the balance could tip in favor of this hypothetical Japanese-Korean alliance, an alliance capable by itself of acting as a counterweight to all the dictatorships in the region region, and that's without counting the United States, Australia, and the rest of their allies. We are talking about a tectonic shift. Of course, we are also talking about two countries that don't get along at all, so it will not be an easy task. Be that as it may, the new South Korean president is advocating closer ties, and Kishida, well, let's just say that the Japanese Prime Minister has begun to grasp the enormous opportunity this presents.
Kishida said cooperation with South Korea needed more than ever.
But wait a minute, because this is not the whole story. Along with foreign policy, Kishida's other major policy objective is the economy, nothing less than reinventing Japanese capitalism. Listen up.
A left turn?
Kishida is clear. He wants to mark a turning point in the Japanese economy, and he wants to do it, according to him, by developing a kind of Japanese capitalism. Well, what exactly does this mean? Well, it basically means implementing ultra-expansionary public spending policies and promoting a greater redistribution of wealth. Yes, sorry, these are essentially the same old Keynesian formulas that Japan has been applying for decades, but now this leader wants to take it one step further. And where did it start? Well, take a look.
Japan's Diet enacts record 107.60 trillion yen budget for FY 2022. Japan's Diet enacted Tuesday a record 107.60 trillion yen, that's $900 billion, budget for fiscal 2022 to finance measures against the coronavirus as well as rising social security and national defense costs. Japan PM Kishida unveils 490 billion stimulus package.
To give you an idea, the stimulus plan presented by Kishida alone represents more than 65% of the entire budget of the European Union's post-COVID recovery plan, with Japan having 3.5 times lower population than the EU. Now don't tell me that's not making a statement. But if this huge increase in public spending is already striking, perhaps the most important thing is where Kishida wants to spend all this money, and even more importantly, how he seeks to finance it. Well, you see, the point of difference between Kishida and his predecessors is that instead of continuing with growth-oriented economic reforms, in this case, he's betting on carrying out a huge wealth redistribution campaign. For example, Kishida wants to increase taxes on large companies and the highest incomes, and to continue pushing the central bank to continue issuing more and more public debt, which already stands at 253% of GDP, thanks precisely to the enormous support that the government obtains from the central bank and the enormous savings of Japanese families. In fact, this is precisely what has caused the latest Japanese yen crisis. Look at this.
Japan once celebrated a cheap yen. Now, the worst currency crash in 20 years is causing widespread panic. Bank of Japan further accentuates the yen's fall by tightening its ultra-loose policy.
Well, the fact is that, with all that money, the Prime Minister has promised direct financial support for households with children, for full-time and temporary workers, and also for small and medium-sized enterprises. The problem with all these things is that they never seem to work. But hey, there's good old Kishida to try to prove otherwise. But that's not all. The other aspect of this kind of new Japanese-style capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, has to do with this.
Kishida calls for aggressive wage hikes and push for wealth redistribution. Japan PM Kishida launches flagship panel to look into wealth redistribution.
The justification for pursuing greater redistribution and pushing for companies to pay higher wages is that, according to this Prime Minister, this will raise consumer demand, and with it, output and inflation. In other words, what the politicians always say. In order to achieve this, the first thing he is doing is to raise the minimum wage, pensions, and medical coverage for workers. On the other hand, he's promoting wage increases in companies in exchange for introducing certain tax breaks. The problem is that Japanese companies generally have lower rates of return than their international comparables, and also that GDP per hour worked is about 30% lower than the G7 average, and almost 40% lower than that of the United States. In other words, Japan is not very productive. This is essentially why higher hourly wages are not paid, and it is also why the average monthly wage has barely increased by $8.5 over the last 9 years. And yes, this also has to do with the fact that the net wealth of the Japanese has been falling sharply for all deciles, except for the richest 10% of the population. And to tell the truth, they haven't experienced any kind of euphoria either. In addition, the capital gains and dividend tax hike proposed by this Prime Minister runs the risk of discouraging investment, which could result in an outcome directly opposite to that expected. Be that as it may, for the moment, this kind of Japanese-style new capitalism, this Fumionomics or Kishidanomics, or whatever the hell they want to call it, generates more questions than answers. In fact, some of the measures announced are as ridiculous as this one.
5,000 yen gift to pensioners unlikely to produce smiles. The ruling coalition is considering providing a lump sum payment to senior citizens to help tide them over during the pandemic. But the figure being floated, 5,000 yen, $42, is unlikely to put smiles on many faces. In fact, many people might regard the amount as insulting.
But well, you see, this is the plan of the new Japanese leader. On the one hand, to increase the international political influence of the land of the rising sun, to increase military spending, and to improve its ties with the United States and South Korea. And on the other hand, it seeks to further dope the Japanese economy with huge increases in the money supply, government stimulus, debt, and inflation. There are those who would call it a mixed bag. In any case, his margin for action could be rather restricted, and it also remains to be seen how long he manages to last in office. Remember that Japan changes prime ministers almost as often as Manchester United changes coaches. But now that we've come this far, it's your turn. Will Japan become a key player in the Asia Pacific? What do you think of the new prime minister's plan? Taking into account the video we made about the new South Korean president, which country do you think will do better? Leave us your comments below, and if you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. Thank you so very much for being there. All the best. I'll see you next time.